My apologies, ladies and gentlemen. I had to stop that previous video prematurely. No further introduction is necessary. We're just going to get right to the second article, courtesy of the Richmond Times Dispatch. Credit to Dave Reese and Charlotte Renee Woods for their contribution. This article is going to cover similar topics that were in the Washington Post article, so we're going to go ahead and get into this one.
This audio presentation is brought to you by Hearing Concepts. Governor Glenn Youngkin rejected bills aimed at cutting prescription drug prices as he completed action on measures from the legislative session and smashed Virginia's record for vetoes. Youngkin vetoed 50 more bills in this final set of bill actions, bringing his total from the session to a record 153 out of the 1,046 the General Assembly approved. Youngkin vetoed more bills in 1 year than any other modern Virginia governor vetoed in his 4-year term. House Bill 570, sponsored by Dell, Carrie Delaney, D. Fairfax, and Senate Bill 274, sponsored by State Senator Creed Deeds, D. Charlottesville, who set up a new prescription drug affordability board. It would be empowered to review the affordability of any prescription drug and say if state-sponsored and state-regulated health plans should limit what they pay for those medications.
Okay, and like I mentioned in the previous video, I would be in support of this affordability board. I mean, based on what it's tasked to do, it would help. And if the sole purpose of this board was to be lowering prescription drug costs, or at least making an attempt to lower those costs, I'm all for the board. So we're going to continue on. And yes, this was a good bill. This was a good bill. I would have voted for it.
Youngkin said in his veto statement, the proposed authority granted to the Prescription Drug Affordability Board, PDAB, would allow medication availability to be determined based solely on cost considerations rather than accounting for the expert opinions of healthcare professionals and the unique medical needs of individual patients.
Okay, and let me stop it right there. Now, based solely on cost, yes. I mean, if the actual purpose of this was to lower prescription drug costs, especially for those who are on a fixed income, what's the problem with that? And then also, you can also account for expert opinions of healthcare professionals and unique medical needs. You can do all the same things under the same board. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I just don't understand the veto here, but we'll continue on.
This approach could limit access to treatments and hinder medical innovation, especially for life-threatening or rare diseases. Jim Dow, State Director of AARP Virginia, said the group is disappointed that Youngkin vetoed what Dow called common sense legislation to reduce costs of prescription drugs. Virginians across the state have made very clear that they expected action to address the unaffordable costs of life-saving medication, and they overwhelmingly support the creation of a prescription drug affordability board, he said.
Okay, and again, I would be disappointed too. And this legislation, it is common sense, and I would say it's more beyond common sense, because I mean, like I said, a board like this could do a lot of good in terms of prescription drug costs and getting them lowered and everything like that. So again, I disagree with this veto. Hopefully they bring it back up, because this particular board would do a lot of good in Virginia as far as prescription drug costs go.
Pharmaceutical firms hailed the move. Governor Youngkin is putting patients first by stopping bad policies that fail to address the root of the problems for rising healthcare costs, said Stami Williams, spokeswoman for the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Trade Association, PHRMA. She said health insurers and their pharmacy benefit managers are the ones who determine what patients pay.
Okay, and of course, you would expect some comments like this from a pharmaceutical firm, but I digress. But again, I see nothing wrong with the creation of a board like this. The purpose is clear. And why the veto here, I don't understand it, but we'll continue on.
Deeds called the argument that companies would do less business scare tactics and noted the proposal has garnered backing across the aisle. This was a bipartisan effort with support from around the state, he said. Senator Bill Stanley R. Franklin, a co-patron of the bill, has said that the measure goes beyond regional interests. This is one of those bills that's going to affect all of us at one time or another.
Okay, and yes, even though Mr. Stanley is a Republican, I agree with his comments here. I mean, it's going to affect us all at one time or another. So I do agree with that. And again, I really disagree with this veto. And like I said before, ad nauseum now, this particular legislation, this particular board would have done a lot of wonders for prescription drug costs. We'll continue.
Members of the public have shared personal stories of struggling to pay for medications they need. Richmond resident Maurice Swinson said he can't totally retire because he needs to be able to afford his diabetes medication.
That's disappointing.
Charlottesville resident Mara Shapiro said she relies on a medication to regulate her cortisol levels to avoid fatal adrenal crises. It simply keeps me alive, she said. While the strain of rising costs can be a burden for some constituents, Deed says the elderly on fixed incomes and low-income people are hit the hardest, sometimes choosing to take their medications less often in order to pay bills or get groceries.
And see, that's what I touched on earlier in this particular article. You know, when it comes to those who are on fixed incomes and those who have low incomes, you know, it's going to affect people like this. And no one of any stature, of any race, of any kind should be put in a situation where they have to determine or make the hard decision as to whether they should pay their bills or get groceries. No one should ever be in a position like that.
School construction surcharge. Youngkin also vetoed Senate Bill 14, sponsored by Senator Jeremy McPike, Prince William, and House Bill 805, sponsored by Del. Sam Rasool D. Roanoke, which would let any locality levy a 1% surcharge on sales taxes to fund school construction if voters approved it in a local referendum. Youngkin said in his veto message, this proposal could result in a nearly $1.5 billion a year tax increase on Virginians. Some localities would have a combined sales tax rate of 8%, with no additional offsets, such as reduced income tax or property tax. He said the state should pursue a tax policy that unleashes economic development and prioritizes job and wage growth through innovative reforms. These reforms must allow hardworking Virginians to keep more of their money.
And this is another, like I mentioned in the previous video, I disagree with this veto because any legislation that goes towards school construction or anything of that nature, I'm all for it, you know, and I don't think this would have hit the taxpayers. And even then, I would suggest or assume that most of the taxpayers would agree with something like this, especially when it comes to making sure school infrastructure is stable. You know, anything less would be uncivilized. Let's continue on.
He also vetoed House Bill 335, sponsored by Del. Deborah Gardner, D. Chesterfield, which would have directed state officials to look into setting minimum wages for tipped employees. Youngkin said that study would have had a predetermined outcome without studying whether tipped minimum wages should, in fact, be increased, adding that in states that increase tipped workers' minimum wages, many tipped workers have seen a decrease in earnings. Just a quick word from our sponsor.
For more than a
I would
decade.
love to know. Okay, let me stop it right there for a bit. I think that ad is going to play when I hit play, but I would love to know what Mr. Youngkin really thinks about whether tip workers should be entitled to an increase in minimum wage or not. I would love to know his actual thoughts on
Hearing
that.
Concepts has been dedicated to enhancing the auditory experience
Excuse
for our
that.
patients. As a locally owned practice, we provide comprehensive hearing healthcare services to the Glen Allen community.
Youngkin previously vetoed measures increasing minimum wages as well as eliminating the exemption from minimum wage law for farm workers.
Well, leave it to a Republican to be against any type of increase in minimum wages, but I digress.
Youngkin also vetoed House Bill 354, sponsored by Del. Patrick Hope, D. Arlington, which would have required the state to set regulations for swimming pools at tourist facilities and spas. Youngkin said the Department of Health already has a role ensuring water quality in those pools.
Okay, now for that one, I would love to see what the Department of Health already has in place in terms of ensuring quality. Excuse me. Let me go back on that one. I would love to know what the Department of Health already has in place in terms of ensuring water quality. I would love to see that. But as it stands right now, I do disagree with that particular veto as well. But like I said, I would love to see the road that the Department of Health has.
He amended several more measures, including one, Senate Bill 212, sponsored by State Senator Aaron Rouse, Democrat Virginia Beach, that would legalize slot machine-like skill games, possibly the hardest-fought battle of the General Assembly session. Confederate tax exemptions. He also amended House Bill 568, sponsored by Del. Alex Askew, D. Norfolk, and Senate Bill 517, sponsored by State Senator Angelio Williams Graves, D. Norfolk, which would eliminate the tax exemptions for the Virginia Division of the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the General Organization of the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the Confederate Memorial Literary Society, and the Stonewall Jackson Memorial. The amendment calls for a second vote on the bills in the 2025 General Assembly session.
Okay, and like I said in the previous video, I don't agree with kicking this to next year. And like I said, I think the only reason why he did this is because we're in an election year. That's the only reason why he kicked it to 2025. But otherwise, I agree with eliminating these tax exemptions for these organizations, especially anything that has to do with the Confederacy.
Senate Bill 238 and House Bill 819, sponsored by State Senator Ghazala Hashmi, D. Chesterfield, and Del. Candy Minden King, D. Prince William, which say health plans have to cover contraceptive drugs and contraceptive devices. Youngkin's amendment says the requirement would not apply to any plans federal law exempt because of religious belief. House Bill 790 and Senate Bill 582, sponsored by Del. Patrick Hope, D. Arlington, and State Senator Adam Eban, D. Alexandria, which bans internet sales of liquid nicotine or nicotine vapor products and the sale of tobacco products from vending machines while boosting enforcement of the ban on sales of tobacco products, including e-cigarettes and liquid nicotine, to minors. The amendment adds the word packages to a section saying stores can't sell more than 2 vaping products at a time.
Okay, that last line, I do agree with that. Stores shouldn't sell more than 2 vaping products at a time. So I do agree with that.
Senate Bill 361 and House Bill 707, sponsored by State Sen. Schuyler Van Valkenburg, D. Henrico, and Del. Michelle Maldonado, D. Prince William, which say data firms cannot sell personal information about a child or keep it if it is used for targeted advertising.
Okay, and going back to House Bill 790 and Senate Bill 582, I do agree with banning internet sales of liquid nicotine or nicotine vapor products and the sale of tobacco products from vending machines. I do agree with those bans.
Where there are differences in our approaches, I hope my amendments reflect the common ground we can find together, Youngkin said. On landlord-tenant issues, Youngkin amended House Bill 740, sponsored by Del. Ray Cousins, D. Richmond, which makes it easier for tenants to dispute what landlords say they owe during an eviction. He also amended House Bill 993 and Senate Bill 422, sponsored by Del. Kathy Tran, D. Fairfax, and State Senator Adam Eban, D. Alexandria, which say landlords can't demand maintenance fees.
And I would like to see more legislation out there, not just statewide, but federal-wide as well, that'll make it easier for or should I say, legislation that will allow the repairing of the relationships between landlords and tenants. You know, of course, everyone has their part to play here, but I would like to see legislation, and I would be in favor of legislation that makes, things for the tenant easier but fair, as well as things for the landlords to be easier but fair. I would be in support of that.
He signed a bill, House Bill 1099, sponsored by Del. Terry Kilgore, R. Scott, setting a tax rate on heated tobacco products that had been the focus on heavy lobbying by Philip Morris International, arguing that it could give a competitive advantage to Henrico County-based tobacco giant Altria. Kilgore said the bill was aimed at ensuring the state kept receiving funds from the 25-year-old master settlement agreement with cigarette makers. Youngkin had until 11:59 p.m. on Monday to sign, veto, or amend bills, including the 700-page state budget. He has proposed more than 230 amendments to the budget, dropping the sales tax expansion the General Assembly approved, as well as his own proposed cuts in income tax rates, along with most of his own spending priorities that the General Assembly rejected. Legislators returned to Richmond on April 17th to take up Youngkin's vetoes and proposed amendments.
And yes, and I'll be paying attention to that, so you can basically anticipate me doing a video on that in terms of what the legislators came up with during their session.
A proposed amendment requires a simple majority for approval. Since it takes a 2/3 vote to override a veto, Youngkins are likely to survive in the nearly evenly split General Assembly, 51 Democrats to 49 Republicans in the House and 21 Democrats to 19 Republicans in the Senate.
Next article.
All right, so
More resources to prepare for the...
Okay, so we've come to the end of this particular article. So like I said, basically, a mixed bag in a sense, some vetoes, well, most of those vetoes I disagree with. But other than that, there are some things that I do agree with in terms of, everything that I talked about in both videos. So kind of even here. I don't think that there's any anyone that I agree with more than others. But like I said, you know, that's my state of Virginia right now. So like I said, some things I agree with, other things I disagree with. But as long as we're on a decent enough path, I'm fine with that. And like I said, the next time I talk about Virginia is going to touch on what the legislators do in terms of the when they take up his videos and things like that. So I'll be looking forward to doing that as well as doing that particular video, which should be this week. So with that being said, everyone, let me know what you think. Do you agree with these videos? Do you agree? Do you disagree with them? Do you agree with what he signed into legislation? Do you disagree with what he signed into legislation? Let me know, especially if you're in the state of Virginia. I would love to know your thoughts on this one. Other than that, if you're ready to become a member of Team Discipline, be sure to like the video, comment as well, share, and subscribe. And until next time, people, take care. And remember, the power of the mind is